thank you very much for the introduction. I think you said already the most important thing. Just one quick addition. If you ask questions and you don't want to raise them in English, I'm perfectly capable of understanding German. So just like put them in German in the chat if you want, German or English. Please, no other language. I'm no polyglot, so but these two work just fine. So yeah, as you said, we are the last session, and I hope I make it a memorable one. I'm introducing myself. I'm Tarek, so you just like call me Tarek. I'm a psychologist, originally from Germany. I'm interested in human behavior and experiences at the workplace, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD in at the HSG in St. Gallen. I have a Master's of Science of Psychology from Regensburg University and worked as a visiting researcher at Harvard University on various projects regarding mental health. I'm happy to also extend a special thanks to our sponsors. And with that, I would directly jump into our topic. And this session is probably a bit special in terms of structure because we start with something interactive. We start with a breakout room session before we get to the actual input. And this has some sense to it because I want you to think about the topic in your own means before you actually get the input. I don't want to bias you. I don't want to bias your thinking before you actually do the task. So, what is about today? Today is all about onboarding processes, and especially onboarding processes that leads to a high feeling of inclusion. Now, we do know that onboarding is a very tricky thing, that people oftentimes lose touch with their employer or not get the feeling of inclusion early on. So what I want you to do is I want you to create a quick draft for an inclusive onboarding process. And to structure this a bit, I denoted 3 time slots. The first day, what would you do on the first day? Just like name one activity that you would always do on the first day when you onboard a new employee. The second time slot is the first month. What would you make sure to do within the first month with your new employee? And the third time slot is the first year. So ideally, you discuss in a breakout room um, what would be the most important thing. So I'm sure an inclusive onboarding process looks different in every company, looks different for every employer, but there are some commonalities, and I want you to find them. Discuss what would be the most important thing the first day, on the first month, and on the first year. Okay, is that clear? Because if yes, I would go into the breakout sessions. Now I just need to find the button for the breakout session. I think I have to stop the screen sharing. Is that right, Julio?
Yeah, you can just tell me how many rooms you want, how many people per room.
For 4 to 5 per room.
Four to
So if
five.
we have
Great.
30,
Great. Dum,
five
dum.
to six. Okay?
So let's go. Remembering,
And
if you don't want to participate, no worries, people, just wait a bit and then
mhm.
the sessions go on later on.
And after
Let's
just
go.
like one quick add-in, just like take 10 minutes, discuss it in your group, and have just like an example ready for every time frame. You don't need to prepare anything or so, or just like write down anything, but I want us to discuss 2 or 3 examples after we come back into the plenary session. Okay?
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Hey, hey, hello back, everyone. Yeah, I think we had at least 3 rooms with very lively debates. And what I really like about this format is that you all are from different organizations, so you probably have different structures when it comes to onboarding, but I'm pretty sure there are some common denominators. Uh, And I would love to hear um, what are the elements of an inclusive onboarding process that you debated or agreed on or did not agree on? And I would love to hear that from one volunteer who wants to summarize the debate or the discussion in his or her group. Uh, does anyone want to speak up for the first day, month, or year? Anything that came up that was interesting in your group? So just unmute yourself and speak. Greta Peters, yes, go.
Hi, everybody. Yes, in our small group, we agreed that we all have a buddy program for the first 90 days. I think it
Hmm.
was for all of us the same, and we all agreed that the new onboardees or the onboardees should feel very welcomed and yeah, should be introduced to colleagues, to their peers, to their stakeholders, let's call it by that. Um, and yes, that we should stay in touch and always ask ourselves, okay, are we still in touch with them or do we
Hmm.
lost them? And we've also talked about a survey, which we do, for example, after 19 days, and asked them, yeah, where do we stand? How was your onboarding experience? But we also agreed that within the first year or after 1 year, we are yeah, giving it to the line manager. Yeah, how was your onboarding after 1 year? So yeah, we from HR don't do very much after 1 year, let's call it by that. So we are not supporting them after 1 year. So maybe
Hmm.
in local support, local consultants, but from a central view or corporate view, we don't do there anything after 1 year.
Hmm. So you have a centralized
So I'm
process.
happy to hear what others are doing after 1 year or yeah.
So you have a centralized process for the first 90 days, was it?
Yeah.
And after that, it's kind of in the fate of the manager, more or less.
Yes.
Yeah, but also happy to hear that you evaluate the process with surveys to see what works and what probably what doesn't work.
Mm.
I'm Was this something that was shared among your group that other institutions have similar structures, or was it something that was very specific to your company?
We've talked about it, and they said, yeah, it's so some of them don't have a survey, but ask them, of course, in an interview or something like that.
Hmm.
Mm. Yes, for us
Yeah.
it's centralized, so we all do that.
Hmm.
Again. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm interested in the very first day.
yeah, of course.
Is there
But we
something?
also have an induction day for all new
Okay.
employees, and they come together and they um, yeah, do some games to get to know each other. And of course, they have yeah, have been told about some security stuff and some history, but we would like to have it more in the yeah, informal way to get to know each other, who's
Hmm.
with me in the same shoes, let's call it uh, like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, they will be introduced to the team, to the line manager, and it's. I think it's very necessary that you schedule some get to know each other appointments with the team, etc., like that. So that's also we do, but not on the first day. It's of course the line manager and say hello to the team, and maybe it's a lunch together. But we split it, of course, within the next days, months, or weeks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's like some anecdotal evidence, but um, in our PhD program, I would say that the most and longest lasting friendship they form on the very first day of the introduction, because we have a get together for every cohort where they meet their peers, and they perform some activities. And I know so many friendships that have lasted for years that took off on this day because they were kind of forced to do some kind of activity together, and then they changed numbers, what that group was born, and the rest is history. So I think these social emotional activities that you do on the very first day, they have a very, very, very strong impact on everything that comes next. Anyone else want to share his or her perspective on the first day or maybe a first month? Just unmute yourself or raise the hand. Anyone with insights for the first year or an even longer time frame? Because if not, then I'm happy to proceed because we are currently conducting a project that tackles exactly this. And the project is called the Inclusion Journey. You might have already guessed it from the title. And I want to walk through certain aspects of the project. And the first thing that I want to talk about is, okay, when we're talking about an inclusive onboarding process, what is the goal, right? What is the feeling that we want to achieve? What do we mean when we talk about inclusion? The second slot would be how does inclusion affect individuals and teams? Why it's important. And the last section is how can we develop it? Um, and we gonna just like slightly introduce you to our project, what we're actually doing, and some preliminary results because we are currently having the first partner company that we gathered some data with, and I think these are very interesting insights that I'm happy to share with you. But let's start from the beginning. What is inclusion? Now, I think after the DNI week, you probably all are experts in inclusion, but I want to summarize it once again. Now, if we have two axes where we can categorize ourselves, the first axis is in a team, can I be myself? And the second axis is, am I actually part of the team? When I cannot be myself and I'm not part of the team, then we have a case of exclusion. That's very, very straightforward. But if I can be myself, but I'm still not part of the team, then I can differentiate myself from the rest, but I'm still not part of the team, right? So that is not inclusion. And something that's very confusing for a lot of people, um, even if I'm part of the team and the team accepts me, that still doesn't mean that I'm included. Because if I cannot be myself with all my quirks and features and all the things that make me an individual, I cannot be an unique individual within a team, then I'm part of the team, but I'm not included as who I am. That something that we call assimilation. Only when I have the feeling that I actually belong as the person that I am, we can talk about inclusion. So inclusion is about two things. It's about being part of the team, but it's also being accepted for who I am. Um, and this is something that we have been studying for a long time in our center, and we know it has various benefits. I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes. And we are able to measure it actually quite well. You've probably seen some examples over the last couple of weeks or days. Um, but there is something that we don't really know, and what we don't really know is just like how can we foster it? How can we create a process that guarantees us with a high probability that if an employee walks through this process with his or her team, afterward, he or she will gonna feel included. So this is something that is still relatively just like mysterious to us, and I want to walk you through it, how we aim to tackle that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the St. Gallen Inclusion Index. Now, I'm just like gonna ask very quickly, have you already talked about the Gallen Inclusion Index in the previous session? If so, please raise the hand. Then I'm gonna skip the slide. No. Okay, then I'm gonna talk about it for a couple of seconds. The Gallen Inclusion Index describes inclusion as a composite measure of 4 dimensions. Um, and the first two are the 2 dimensions that you've already seen on the matrix before. This is authenticity and belongingness. Can I be myself? And does the team accept me? But we conceptualize inclusion as going even beyond that. And we add 2 dimensions, and the 2 dimensions are synergy. So, can we express ideas openly that we can actually foster the creative potential that we have in a team? And the second and the fourth and last dimension is, do we have equal opportunity? This is more of a structural domain. Do we have fair HR processes? Is there a fair performance evaluation? Do we have equal pay? And everything like that contributes to the fourth and last pillar. And the lead question is always just like, does my team accept me for who I am as a person? And we've conducted various studies on it. In longitudinal studies, we see positive direct and indirect effects on perception of health, on turnover intention, on team performance, and so on. And it's generally something that we aim to foster, especially in the context when we have what we call double-edged sword effects. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What do I mean when I talk about double-edged sword effects? So a lot of phenomena that we encounter at the workplace, they have 2 sides to one coin. So let's talk about diversity. And oftentimes diversity is something that is framed as something unequivocally good. So the more diverse a team, the better. The higher the share of women in a team, the better. The more just like diverse and the more perspectives I have, the better our team works as a team. But that's not so easy. That's not so true. I wish it was, but the business case for the diversity is actually a very complex one. So we have a lot of opportunities when we're talking about diversity and diverse team. We have an increase of creativity. We have more problem solving and decision making skills in one team, and people can learn from one another. We have a ideally collaborative learning experience in a team where younger people can learn from older people, males can learn from female, and people with a disability can actually bring their personal and unique experiences of the workplace to shape the team overall into the team. So there's a lot of potential. There's an upside to diversity, but the thing is, there's also a downside to diversity. We have communication problems. We have prejudices, and humans tend to stereotype. They tend to simple biases. This is not due to some just like humans being evil, or it's just like some evolutionary processes that happen quicker than we think. And even in teams that are very aware and teams that are very highly skilled to deal with a very diverse workforce, conflict, prejudices, stereotyping, this all can happen. And also, we need to invest more into diverse teams, both time but also other resources. So we have these 2 sides to the coin, and inclusion can help to mitigate the negative effects and turn the pendulum towards the positive side. So it's kind of a moderating effect to diversity. It helps us foster the upside and helps to mitigate any negative effects. The same thing with other megatrends, for instance, remote work. There is a large plethora of research coming out on remote work that it grants more autonomy to people. We have access to a greater talent pool. It's positive for work-life balance. Yes, but We also have a risk of creativity loss. We recently had some projects with the automotive company, and the CEO of the automotive company, his lead slogan was always, "We don't create cars in Microsoft Teams." And as a remote worker, I kind of dislike that, but he's right, right? For complex creative processes, you need the personal interaction. We have communication barriers and team cohesion, and everything that happens manually, automatically in a present environment, in an office space, has just more flavor to it. So inclusion is also here a key strategy to help to shift the pendulum to the positive side, to manage remote teams. We actually have a study on that right now in the second R&R. So this is a very, very, um, very strong mechanism to make it a bit kind of manage the dual sides of one phenomena. Similarly, with the war of talent, we now have a very competitive market for talent and high potential. Um, but also, we have a higher turnover rate. So the competition is also very real between companies. And also here, inclusion can help to foster an environment where the turnover rate is low and people actually like to stay with a great employer. So also here we have a strategy in inclusion to help to mitigate the negative effect and to foster the positive ones. So we don't only have a direct effect, we also have an environment where in complex situations, the better the upside can thrive. To give you a very tangible example on a study that we did before is we like to do longitudinal studies. Now, why do we like to do longitudinal studies? Well, you all heard about correlation is not causation, right? So to get a better grip on how inclusion fosters certain aspects, in our case, we measured the employee health as a dependent variable of inclusion. We measure it across time in various settings. You see 6 months between the time lag. Here we have 3 time points that we measured both the variables in. I'm just like gonna get my laser pointer here. Can you see it? Yeah, exactly. So we have a 6 month lag between the time measurements, and we measured inclusion with the Gallen inclusion index. And if you put everything together, these 4 dimensions, you end up with one composite measure that you can regress on other measures. And here we just assess the overall health status of the employee. And a typical study would just regress these two together and see whether they correlate with one another. But what we did is what we call a random intercept cross-sec panel model, where we looked into, does inclusion at time point 1 predict health at time point 2? And this gives us much more of a near causal interpretation of the coefficient than the simple correlation would give us. So not only that, we also controlled for the reversed effect to kind of solve the hen and egg problem, because obviously it could also be people that feel healthier have more energy to feel included, right? So this was a setup, and what we found was that we have a very, 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 very strong effect of inclusion on employee health perceptions. And not only that, it's really, oops, there you go. It's really this way. So inclusion predicts health, but health does not predict inclusion. So what we have here is we have a mechanism that we can use to keep the workforce healthy. And the most important thing is that this is a population average effect that is true for everyone in our sample, not just people with minority status. And this is something that's very interesting, because inclusion is often perceived as something that we do to make people with a minority status feel included into the team. It's not. It has also positive effect for the majority of the team, for the people who are not disabled, who don't have a migrational background or something like that, but are just like, I would say, the average Joes that you have in your sample. Everyone can profit from inclusion in a good working team. So this is a key line, and therefore a key strategy to increase the subordinates' health levels. Do you have any questions for that study? Because this is something that typically raises questions because it's a bit more complex, and I don't want to bore you with any numbers. All right. So now we know inclusion is something that is desirable for everyone in the team. And the next question is, how can we develop it? We launched the Inclusion Journey project, and the Inclusion Journey project aims to tackle 4 main questions. And all these main questions can be summarized into what are the drivers of inclusion? 4 different perspectives. For instance, if you look at from manager's lens, you would ask yourself what specific leadership tactics are useful to foster inclusion? Are there specific experiences that make inclusion unique? For individuals, it is, are there individual risk factors, demographic attributes? For instance, are females more likely to perceive lower inclusion than males, or are minority groups especially at risk? Um, from the organizational standpoint, it's obviously about, okay, are there organizational structural things that block the development of inclusion? Is there something where we as an organization lag behind compared to other organizations? And lastly, something that is often overlooked is a temporal development, the phases of inclusion. So is the first phase, the first days, fundamentally different from like 1 week in, 5 weeks in, 10 weeks in? Is early inclusion a strong predictor of long-term retention? And how does the typical curve, inclusion curve, look like? Because typically we observe very high values of inclusion in the first days, and oftentimes it drops once the new hires meet the reality. And how can we shape that curve? So these are the 4 clusters of questions that we would like to answer with the project. And how do we do this? Well, we have an extensive project, and I want to just like make you familiar with the project path so you kind of have a feeling of where do these numbers actually come from that we're gonna discuss in a few minutes. And first, before or at the very first day at the latest, um, we had a baseline survey that we hand out to individuals joining the company. This is a very detailed survey which entails demographic variables and some elements that are time stable. For instance, personality. Personality items are super important. And they usually don't change much within the time frame of our study. So this is something that we assessed before. This is just a single survey. And then directly after they joined the company, we had a daily survey where we would have very short daily surveys about their inclusion experiences at work. We asked them about well-being experiences, but we also had some open questions. One of them you can see on the right-hand side corner of the slide, which is, has there been a situation today in which you felt especially included? If yes, please describe briefly what happened. So they got a survey in the mail at the end of the workday, where they just like had a kind of a like a diary to report what happened to them in an open text format. And this open text format, this stimulates also kind of like a journaling experience to think about, okay, how was the day? Was there something that happened to me that made me feel included? Or we also had questions, were there some things that happened that made you feel excluded? Was there something where you just were dissatisfied with your day? These were also very important information. And having the new hires reflect on the process was something that yielded very valuable information. after the daily phase, we kind of phased it out with a monthly survey where we did kind of a similar thing, but on a broader time scale. And then we had another daily phase where we pretty much did the same thing that we did in the very first daily survey, but then they were already seasoned experts in their new company. So we could kind of contrast the very first experiences with the experiences 6 months in, which gives us an interesting comparison. And after that, 1 year later, we have a follow-up survey where we see, okay, how did inclusion develop over time? How did their well-being, their performance, and so on, trying to match it with the very first value to see was there a drop? If yes, how significantly, or was there maybe even an increase? So this was kind of a closing survey. And yeah, this is the structure of the project. So we have a lot of closed questions, psychometric questions, but we also have open questions, which gives us a very, very, very rich data set to investigate how inclusion develops over time in these companies. Ideally, we want to roll this out in the future with a consortium where we do joint public relations work, and we also can compare the results between organizations. Right now, we are at a stage where we almost finished with one organization, but it's very, very, very interesting to contrast these findings against other organizations and to try to create a benchmark that goes beyond just one organization. So this is something that we want to do in the future. And we got to the time, I'm gonna skip this slide and jump straight into the case study because right now, and this is a work in progress, so we are still collecting data. This is not a full data set. We just started out, but we have one partner company where I would like to talk with you about a few of the results. So this is a public health insurance company. So this is a German-speaking sample, and the data collection started 1 year from now in August 2024, and it's still ongoing. So we still have new hires in the data set that we still have data from. So it's the very extensive data set. The data set is on apprentices and newly starting apprentices. So it's a very, very young sample. The mean is roughly a bit over 18 years, and it's a very female sample. It's roughly 200 people, and 70% of them have at least a high school diploma. So it's a well-educated sample for this young of a group. 27% migrants, 8% have a disability. So this is pretty average in terms of their share of migrants with a disability. And this is a sample that we have been following along for 1 year now. So what did we find? Well, one thing that we found was the inclusion values at the very beginning of the study were super high. So we asked questions about authenticity, we asked questions about belongingness, we asked questions about equal opportunities, and we also included another dimension, which means that the project is quite customizable, which we call uniqueness. And as you can see on this graph, they score pretty high for every dimension. And this can also be a honeymoon effect because what we observed working with apprentices, joining the workforce, the values that you get at the beginning are typically higher than what you get 3 months and 6 months and 9 months and especially sadly equal opportunities that almost over 90%, almost everybody agrees to perceiving equal opportunities at the workplace once they start. So once they have a certain track record, these perceptions can change. So the much more interesting question is what actually drives the perceptions of inclusions, and especially if we look at the individuals who don't really feel included, who have lower values. Do they have some certain commonalities? Do they have something in common? And this is what we are going to look into next. So what we did is we looked into predictors of inclusion, and there were many, but a lot of them were kind of obvious. So they had something to do with social emotional factors, such as not being emotionally exhausted, low stress, um, team cohesion, and so on. There were a lot of factors that were kind of related um, to inclusion, but also conceptually very close to inclusion. So what I brought to you today are two predictors of inclusion that I did not have on the radar and that we are going to investigate scientifically a bit further in the future. But the data on that is very, very striking because we did not only measure socio-emotional variables or work-related variables, we also measured general health variables. And one of them is sleep quality. So what we included in the diary is a general measure of sleep quality. Now, there are some scientific measures of how to measure sleep quality. So we just like asked them to rate their sleep quality after every day. And we tried to investigate a relationship on how this influences the perception of inclusion on the following day. And I just want to ask you, what do you think? How are these two variables, sleep quality and inclusion, related? Yeah, I see. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah, and this is exactly what we found. What we found is that sleep quality in general is positively associated with inclusion. So inclusion as a measure goes beyond what happens in the team and in the workplace. It also relates to more general measures of health and more general measures of life quality. So individuals with high sleep quality generally feel more included, and individuals with low sleep quality generally report lower levels of inclusion. And this, in my opinion, is a very strong argument to also look into the health management of managing employees. Are there any programs that go beyond what's happening in the workplace? Are there any programs on just like sleep hygiene or other things that typically would not come to your mind when you talk about just like health management in the workplace? I want to add that we cannot really claim anything about the direction of causality here because this is a very early and just like very raw finding that we found. But to me, it was one of the most interesting finding because we found it consistently all across the board of our data. And the next result that I want to share with you is sedentary behavior as a predictor of inclusion or as a shaper of inclusion. Sedentary behavior generally refers to the behavior or the time during a day that we spend seated. How many hours per day do we sit? And we found a direct effect of sitting time on inclusion. But what I found even more striking, who sit relatively few hours a day, generally have a more favorable trend of inclusion over time. So the first 10 days in individuals that have a very active workday and a very active lifestyle and report very few hours sitting a day, just 4 hours. So that means they probably have a standing desk or some kind of job that makes encourage them to stand and walk. They have a slightly favorable trajectory of inclusion. Whereas if we compare that to individuals that sit for a long time, we see a detrimental outcome and a decrease of inclusion over time. So not only do we have a direct effect because the brown line is generally lower than the green line, we also have a less favorable development in individuals that are very inactive. And this is something that goes beyond just general activity, because we also had general activity measures in that sample. For instance, just like, do you do sports? If yes, how much? But sitting, just plain sitting, explained the most variance when it came to social elements. So the connection between just like how sedentary is your general behavior and how well included do you feel in the team is much stronger than do you run a marathon or do you do a lot of sports? And I found this very surprising because I thought sport would be a stronger predictor, but it's not. It's just how active are you on a general working day. Nope. Then I'm gonna skip the next slide and go one step further, because what we try to do, or trying to do right now, we're still in the phase of data collection, is we want to investigate the open-ended question, because what we saw right now up to here were just closed questions. So we have psychometric measures of inclusion and well-established medical measures of sedentary behavior and sleep. But what we also had were these open questions. So has there been a situation today in which you felt especially included? If yes, please describe briefly what happened. And what we saw is a plethora of different answers that employees gave us. And these are all real answers that I kind of anonymized, so we're not reaching confidentiality here. One answer, for instance, is like, my supervisor approached me during lunch break and asked me about my weekend. We found out that we share same hobbies. And another answer was how I feel about my tasks. It's like people were asked and approached about something that they did at work. And we received a wide variety of these answers. And our goal was to see, do these answers share a common theme? For instance, we had one group of answers that would relate to aspects of work-related things. We had a group of answers that were connected to more social emotional things. And what we tried to achieve is that we cluster the responses of the answers into common themes. And we did that using topic modeling. So topic modeling is a machine learning based method to cluster responses with similar themes into topics. So we had almost 850 documents of the participants to analyze in a longitudinal fashion, so 10 work days. We basically had their diary, and the typical responses were just like, today was allowed to pick up the phone, we laughed together. But a lot of these responses were also food related. So somebody said, hey, somebody bought muffins, and I felt very included, so I can very much relate to that. And what we found were basically two large thematic clusters. And the first thematic cluster was social emotional responses. So all things about just like connecting with people, something that goes beyond the workplace and has not really anything to do with the workplace at all. And the second topic was work-related responses. So people were able to do a task, or were allowed to do a task that they typically would not be allowed to do. They received some help doing their task. So these were the two main clusters. Greta, I have your question. I would come back to this at the end, okay? Um, and what we found is that if we quantify that, the social emotional responses were far, 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 far more frequent than the work-related responses. So 80%, roughly 80% of the responses had some kind of social emotional content. Very few, 20% responses were actually work related. So what really stuck with the people were the coffee machine chit chat, were the experiences that they had with the workplaces that were not with their colleagues, that were not work related. And what we also try to investigate is, does that differ between, for instance, men and women? And we looked into that, And typically, I would expect women to report more social emotional responses and men to report more work-related responses. But that was not the case, actually. Surprisingly, males actually had even more social emotional responses than women. So we kind of break the stereotype here, and this could be due to many reasons. For instance, men were the minority actually in that group. It could also play a role. But these typical gender biases, gender stereotypes that we have, they don't really seem to apply all that much when it comes to reporting feelings of inclusion. What we also looked into was the topics by disability. And what we found is that people with a disability reported far, far more social emotional responses than people without a disability. And in work-related responses, it was the other way around. And this also kind of surprised me because I would have had the general hypothesis that people with a disability are more likely to have some work-related issues because they're simply not able to do this or not that, and feel especially included when somebody offers them help. But this was not the way it was. And this could also be something with minority status, that people with a disability generally are the minority in their group, and therefore are especially sensitive to social emotional responses. But this is just a post hoc hypothesis from my own side. This was just like something that really surprised me when we're looking at the results. Um, so this is the very first look into the data, what we have here. And just to sum it up, apprentices have apparently very, very, very different needs to feel included, but the main cluster, the main cluster, two dominant topics, the first is social emotional needs, and the second is work-related needs. And what is a general pattern is that social emotional needs are mentioned significantly more than work-related needs. And this ratio is even more pronounced in individuals with a minority status, such as a disability. So to sum it up, if we want to foster an inclusive onboarding process, we especially have to focus on the social elements, the social emotional elements, the making connection, which is far more important and sticks far more than anything work related. What I need to add here is that we have a limited sample. This is a very early data analysis. We don't have the final data set yet. We don't have the final report yet. So this is just what we see looking at the data now as it is. We are still progressing with the project, gathering more data. Also, if you feel this might be something for your company or your organization, feel free to approach me after the session, or just write me an email, because we are still rolling this out to other companies as well to make comparisons across companies. So I'm just like gonna take some key takeaways for this session. The first thing is that we can say is inclusion is strongly shaped by very, very early socio-emotional experiences at the workplace, coffee talk, chatting about seemingly unimportant topics, and the feeling of honest curiosity in one's life. This is especially true for individuals with a disability and individuals with a minority status. Inclusion has valuable outcomes, both for minorities, but also for the majority of a group. Boosts health, productivity, it lowers turnover, and it's also shaped by physiological aspects that you might not have on the radar yet. Sleep quality and general level of activity were found to be very, very important predictors of perceptions of inclusion in our sample. And now I'm gonna turn to the two questions. The first was, because I don't know if you all read the chat, um, would you assume that it's possible to compare this group of onboardees with people who are more experienced within the labor market? Would be interesting with regard on the participation rate for all of these surveys you're planning. We've got the feedback in the past, ask less or not so often. Yes, this is a problem that we regularly face because if we have a lot of surveys, we have a lot of attrition. And it's always a kind of a trade-off in just like how intensive are you going to structure your surveys and how much information do you get? So we observe a high attrition rate, but this is something that we planned for. So it's something that naturally happened. So, and these surveys always, they are already as short as we can make them and as lightweight as we can make them. So it's really not possible to make them any shorter. And we invested a lot of time to just like make it as non-invasive as possible. Um, but still, I think having a certain attrition rate is something that just like happens naturally. And you just have to plan for that in advance to kind of oversample. We started with 200 apprentices. We went down to around a 100 after a while. This is just how it is. And the first question is very interesting if we can compare that with people who are more experienced within the labor market. I'm not so sure, and I'm eager to find out because the next project that we want to have is a cohort of more experienced individuals to contrast that to the apprentices. Now, the project initially was focused on apprentices, but um, it is adaptable to everyone joining an organization. And having this intra company and intra seniority comparison would be something that's very, very interesting for practitioners. And the next question, last question was, is there a difference in the sense of feeling safe and supported between people with visible and invisible disability? Um, I would guess so, yes. But we can't say that reliably from the data simply because our N is too small for that. If we would distinguish visible and invisible disabilities, um, then we would just like have too small of a sample to actually make reliable inferences. So I can't say for sure, but judging from our previous experiences, yes, this makes a strong difference. Is that people with invisible disabilities have very different needs, and oftentimes face very unique challenges because they have to explain their disability to people, and people oftentimes are not that understanding as they should be. And Julio turned on his camera. This means I already overdrafted the time.
Yeah, sort of. I'm sorry to say, but
Yeah, but
I'm
we
glad on the
are at
other
the
hand
finish.
that like interest was really high. Everybody was here almost to the end, most people, so it's awesome. Tarek, thank you very, very much for a very
Thank you.
insightful and really dignifying end to our Diversity and Inclusion Week this year.
Thank you. Thank
Everybody
you. Thank you
saying
for attending.
thanks, so many claps, awesome. You can see a few of the upcoming events that we will be having as well. Okay. And of course, next year, the 10th edition, we will do something special. We don't really know what yet,
Yeah, save the
but we
date.
are on it.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank
Great.
you.
So, wish you all a great weekend and bye bye, everybody. See you next year.